Our story begins with Stratford University's freshman orientation. The tour guide is Daryl Witherspoon, who's also an economics major. The university's financial aid doesn't cover much, so he has to hustle to pay for the tuition. That includes giving these tours every half hour, working food services, and delivering campus mail, which he does simultaneously whenever possible, like this quick stop during the tour to deliver a parcel to Dr. Wheaton at the neuropsychology department. On the phone with his mom, he tries to adjust her expectations about that Wall Street job he's applying to. She complains about her own struggle and says they're threatening to turn off her gas supply. Daryl offers to pay the bill before she tells him that it adds up to $223. He asks his mother what the hell she's been cooking, but sends her the money anyway. So when the tuition office calls him right after that, he answers in a female voice and regrets to inform that Daryl has passed away. Then he's off to hustle some more. The Harlem Center Blood Bank accepts only one donation per month, so he puts on several different disguises to bypass the rule. Until he faints, of course. That is exactly why the rule exists in the first place. That means he needs to diversify. After a pleasant afternoon at the sperm bank, he tries to sell some of his hair at the salon. Not necessarily from his head. Not everyone has to jump through outlandish hoops like him. Tim LaFour, for example, has a hockey scholarship. He's Daryl's roommate, and he goes through periodic cycles of self-reinvention, constantly changing style and ideology. Daryl asks about the jingling sound when he walks and regrets the question as soon as he explains about the new piercing. At lunchtime, he has the pleasure to meet another student who's drowning in privilege, Scott Thorpe. This one makes no effort to hide his superiority complex, especially in this case because he's also applying for that Wall Street job. When he begins to list the reasons why he'll be the one to get it, Daryl adds the item he forgot to include. Scott's dad runs the third largest bank in Manhattan. Later that day, we see Scott is not the only competition. Mr. Randall Tyson, from Smythe Bates Brokers, is explaining the selection process to a bunch of candidates. He says 5 of them will be shortlisted. Then he'll pick the best student among these 5 to be their new junior analyst. So their professor begins to ask some questions about specific cases. While Scott answers them from the point of view of a greedy owner, Daryl tries to bring social considerations to the solution. Scott responds to that by mocking the hairnet he forgot to remove and whispering that he's out of his league. After that session, our hero realizes he needs to up his game. Mr. Tyson mentioned extra points for involvement in sports, so here is poor Daryl trying to get into the hockey team. Their coach refuses to entertain the idea, but Tim promises to put in a good word. So they make him goalie to teach him a lesson. And boy, does he learn. While performing one of his several paid activities, Daryl stumbles upon something interesting. Dr. Wheaton is hosting a seminar that involves making money. His assistant explains this is the first round of human tests of Protocol 563. That's the kind of sentence that would make a lot of us just up and leave right away. In fact, by the time she's done listing all possible side effects, everyone has done just that. Except for one person, our brave Daryl. Dr. Wheaton says the drug is meant to enhance all the 5 senses. He'll see like an eagle and have ultrasonic hearing. The doctor tells him it's very important to take the precise dosage once a day before going to bed. The drug must be injected into one of his cheeks, not the ones on his face. Anyway, Daryl is not paying much attention to any of that. His only question is about the payment. Wheaton says he'll get $3,000. So, if he had any reservations, they just got flushed down the toilet. At night, he goes to a frat party. Since hockey didn't really work out, maybe he should work his way into a Kappa something. And that's where he meets the beautiful Janice. His attempts to flirt are as easy to watch as his hockey performance. And then his evening begins to get even worse because Scott is also there. He makes him sit in the middle of his fellow Kappas and explains everything they have that he doesn't. In short, not Kappa material. Humiliated and distressed, Daryl leaves the party. When he gets home, he fills up the syringe with that neon drug. It's not like he has much to lose. In the morning, there's a midterm exam that counts heavily for the Smythe Bates job. Daryl is having some trouble concentrating because of a horrid stench that no one else seems to smell. Then the sound is turned up dramatically, the sound of everything. And it doesn't stop there. Sunlight hits a girl's necklace, and he's almost blinded. Everything is so enhanced that his own discomfort begins to bother his colleagues. Eventually, he snaps and yells a string of insults at everyone. At Whedon's lab, Daryl complains about the side effects and the intense rectal itching. The doctor says the itching is the only side effect that he is experiencing. All the rest are the positive results of the drug. His brain just needs more time to adjust to extremely heightened senses. So he must find a way to cope for now, which leads to a person like Tim calling him weird. To make things worse, he has just heard that he didn't make the top 5 for that job. But he still has to work in the event to celebrate those who did make it. Good news is that he has learned to adjust his senses now. So he uses them to show Mr. Tyson how much he knows about the economy. Some of it is cheating, of course, but his interpretation and arguments are real. All he needs is a chance to shine, and that's what he gets tonight. Tyson flat out asks him how come he's not a finalist. The boy explains that his several jobs take their toll, and the negative impact on his midterms was inevitable. Touched by his sad story, Tyson decides to make it 6 this year. Daryl is on the list now. He's very proud of himself. But Dr. Whedon is even more. The results are just unbelievable, surpassing his wildest hope. Daryl apologizes for his complaint the other day. Now he thinks the drug is amazing and makes him feel powerful. The doctor tells him to be careful. Power itself is a kind of drug. Maybe it's too late for that piece of advice. Daryl is now confident enough to visit that same frat house again. No wild party this time, but there's a modest get-together going on to celebrate the Kappas who got into Phase 2 of Smythe, Bates' version of Hunger Games. Mr. Tyson is there with his colleague, Mr. Bellwether, both recently added to Daryl's fandom. Devastated to learn that their star boy has been rejected by their former fraternity, they call for a revote. Nobody has the guts to vote against what is so obviously their wishes, and that's how Daryl gets his pledge. Before he leaves, Janice shows up with a friend. They go to the ladies' room to gossip, but that's the kind of thing that no longer stops the Superboy. Using the enhanced hearing to eavesdrop on them, he listens to Janice telling her friend what kind of man she wants. Bingo. The moment she walks out, Daryl is waiting to act the part to a T. As a consequence, she lets him walk her home. On the way there, he smells a fresh rose hidden under a bunch of twigs. He offers it as a gift to his lady, with a corny comment about finding beauty in odd places. All that BS seems to be working on her. She even mentions something about the no kissing on the first date rule and how she's deciding to break it or not. Faking innocent surprise, Daryl asks if this was a date. She says she's just planning ahead. Maybe dinner tomorrow. So he gets her number and leaves, jumping up and down with joy. At the apartment, poor Tim is having doubts about his most recent belief system, which involves a specific kind of deprivation. He's struggling to stay strong but ends up grabbing the magazine and going to the bathroom. That's how he catches Daryl injecting the drug. He misunderstands what he saw and now feels bad for his addict friend. Fueled by his newly found confidence, Daryl is ready to hit the ice again. The hockey team coach immediately notices an improvement in his skating skills, but still hesitates when he asks for a second chance. Then, a puck comes flying at high speed right towards the man's face, and Daryl catches that thing like a pro. That surely earns him the goalie spot back, and the coach does not regret his decision at all. Nothing gets past Daryl now. The audience is amazed at such a demonstration of skill. They probably could do without the cartoonish fighting sounds, but no one's even complaining. After the match is over, Tim joins him in a pathetic celebratory choreography. A few days later, Stratford Panthers faced Brownstone U at the Baxter Ring. The game is narrated on the university radio by Chet, who introduces Daryl as the first African American to play for Stratford. He also has some trouble getting his last name right. The game begins, and the first comments are about Daryl's unsuspected talent and Tim's unhinged behavior. Abstinence may be getting the better of the young man, who's now compensating with violence. But he is still a good player, and he's the first one to score. Chet is astonished to see the Panthers take the lead for the first time in his entire life. That unbelievable advantage is kept for way longer than anyone could expect thanks to Daryl's spectacular saves. The Panthers win the game, against all the conceivable odds. Those two boys in the radio booth have never experienced that much excitement. On the next day, Daryl is dressed for success when he enters the Smythe Bates building. Scott and Mr. Tyson are talking in a different room, but Daryl can hear the conversation as if they were sitting right in front of him. So when they come out, he's ready to make just the right comment, which happens to directly counter Scott's views on the same topic. Always impressed by Daryl's insights, Mr. Tyson begins the interview with as much honesty as a man like that can stomach. He tells Daryl it may be hard to convince the board to choose him over the other 5 boys. They are all famously picky about this junior analyst position, and it's important to match their high expectations. Daryl guarantees he will exceed them. It's now obvious that Dr. Wheaton's words of caution are long lost in the middle of that chapter. The decision will be made 5 days after the final competition. Bellwether wants to spend quality time with each candidate, and that's how Daryl gets floor seats for the Knicks game next Friday. Tyson warns him that a man named Arlo Vickers will join them. He's from Vickers Mining and is considering becoming a client at Smythe Bates. It will be extremely helpful if he manages to impress that man. That night, someone else gets very impressed by Daryl. Janice is having dinner at his place, and to everyone's surprise, he has cooked the meal himself. She says it's the best food she has ever eaten. Tim is home too, but he's studying for a poetry exam in his room. He's reading a poem in a very low voice. Janice can't hear it at all because the door is closed, but her date can. He begins to repeat the verses as if he had them memorized. Amazed at such a variety of talents, the girl forgets about that silly rule she had and kisses Daryl. That turns out to be a bad idea. His sense of touch is also very heightened, so he gets to the finish line before poor Janice even knew there was a race going on. And of course he won't let a drop go to waste. He goes directly to the sperm bank with an empty gallon and asks how much they would pay for that. Fortunately, the frustrating experience doesn't seem to put Janice off all that much. He even takes her to meet his mom and countless younger siblings. Daryl sees himself as their father figure and takes upon himself to educate these kids. The poor things have no idea of what's in store for them, now that he can smell who smokes cigarettes and stuff like that. His mom tells Janice that her husband left her to raise that crowd all by herself, but Daryl always helps out as much as he can, and she is grateful for having such a good son. When he gets home, Tim asks about the mysterious medicine he's been taking every night. Daryl begins to praise the substance like he's doing an infomercial on it. Tim still thinks he's on drugs, which technically he is, but he suspects it's illegal stuff, so he's trying to talk him out of it. He says the medicine can't transform him into a different person. Deep down, he's the same old Daryl. That's when our asinine hero decides to disobey the doctor's orders and take an extra dose. He tells Tim that tomorrow he'll be the same old Derry times 2. Let's see about that. At 7:30, the alarm clock goes off, and Daryl can't land a punch on it to save his life. He thinks his arm may be asleep at first, but then he tries to use his legs, and they are also misbehaving. Looking at these pathetic attempts to move like a human, Tim is fully convinced that he needs help. Dr. Wheaton doesn't even need to push his patient very much until he breaks down and confesses. He then explains what could be happening. The human brain is not built to take that kind of sensorial overload, so it needs to shut down one of the 5 senses to accommodate the others. And the dormant one is constantly switching, making possible adaptations even harder. This nightmare will last 3 days, and the doctor recommends bed rest. Sadly, that is not an option. Daryl's entire life will be decided in the next few days. Starting tonight, with the Knicks game, Mr. Vickers is excited to meet the Wonder Boy. That's exactly when his brain decides to shut down hearing. He starts to act like a fool, repeating stuff that's just been said and shouting for beer in the middle of the anthem. When he comes back with the drinks, his sight is off. Beer is spilt everywhere, and he takes the wrong seat. His potential bosses are completely horrified, but Vickers is amused. Tyson says he's signing with them on Monday. He also says that's the only reason he's out of the competition after tonight's abhorrent behavior. Now it's Saturday night, and the boys have a surprise visitor. Lorraine is Janice's gorgeous sorority sister, who also happens to have an eye on Daryl, especially since the super senses. Tim thinks there's no way that can be a social visit, so that's gotta be his dealer. So while he runs to the payphone for advice, Daryl does his best to refuse Lorraine's offer. Not because he's tempted, but because he can't even interact with her well enough to reject her. She ends up too freaked out by his performance and leaves just when Janice is coming. He tries to explain the situation, but she thinks he can only be mocking her, and right after cheating. So she leaves, slamming the door shut. Then Tim arrives with the intervention crew. Daryl is finally forced to tell them what's going on. Comes Sunday, and it's the hockey game. Everyone's excited to see the Panthers and their star goalie shine. They are beyond disappointed. Daryl's performance is almost as bad as his normal self. But our boy still has a lot more damage to do. Not knowing that Janice's dad is no other than Mr. Tyson, he pays her a visit to apologize. Unable to see the person he's talking to, he says all kinds of inappropriate stuff and gets kicked out. It's the last night before the big evaluation. Both Scott and Daryl spend it studying, though in very different ways. Daryl begins to think the double dose is finally wearing off. Monday morning disagrees with that. His faltering senses get him robbed minutes before the event, and he's forced to show up in a ridiculous suit. But none of that matters when the discussion starts. Daryl completely outshines his peers, this time with a skill that is truly his. Scott's parents are clearly embarrassed to realize he memorized the answers, but could not explain the reasons behind any. The decision is an easy one. Daryl gets the job, and everyone is happy. Except for Daryl. This is not right. He apologizes to everyone and tells them about the drug, confessing to having cheated his way into the shortlist. Tyson and Bellwether ask for a moment to deliberate. They decide nobody will be a junior analyst this year, but Daryl is offered a decent job in the mailroom, which is where Mr. Tyson had started his career. And this is the end. This was a recap of the 1990